We first planned this event in January this year, and sadly Gareth passed away before the event, and we felt that we couldn't run it. But I know Gareth would have liked us to run the event later, and he was such a very great architect, an architect of European stature, if not world stature, and a huge loss to Glasgow. So I think it's appropriate, although there was a wonderful memorial to Gareth in March at the Museum of Scotland this year. Glasgow hasn't, as far as I know, done anything to mark his passing, and I think it's suitable and appropriate to do it tonight. It's Chris.
Great, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to share a bit about Gareth and who he was and his contribution, I guess, to architecture in Scotland, but also to the office and the people in the office personally. So in the background, I'm just going to set off some rolling images of Gareth and some of his sketches, some of the projects he was involved in, just to give you a flavour for the work he was involved in as part of the office. So Gareth was born in Edinburgh in 1967. He attended George Watson College before studying architecture at the Mackintosh School of Architecture, where some of you may have known him there. Karen was just saying she was in the year below, which is many other people will have met him at that point. He worked over the summers as a student at Michael Laird's office and enjoyed the experience very much. After his degree, he had a year out with Trevor Dannett, who remembered him as a natural architect and with boyish enthusiasm, which he managed to retain. His final 2 years at the Mac under Andy McMillan and Izzy Metzstein brought Gareth rich opportunities, with 6 months in Florence under the Erasmus Exchange Programme, focusing on large-scale urban projects, followed by a final year project for a new railway station in Florence, which won the City of Glasgow Silver Medal and the RSA Architecture Award. And then working on an installation at the Mackintosh School of Art with Ted Cullinan as part of Glasgow European Capital of Culture in 1990. After a spell helping to build the Mac Pavilion for the 1991 Venice Biennale and travelling to Europe, Gareth joined the London-based architect Prannoy and Prasad in 1992. Gareth worked on a number of health, community and arts projects with Prannoy and Prasad, including a prison visitor centre whose client was to be his first and with his own practice in Glasgow. He spoke fulsomely of the value of his experience at Prannoy and Prasad, and his contribution to the development of that practice has been recognised by both Greg and Sunand. It was on his return to Scotland that he and Sarah, whom he had met at university through his love of fencing, were married. Okay. They went on to have 2 children. And equal to his passion for architecture was his love of his family life, which he was often sharing stories in the office. In 1998, he set up Gareth Hoskins Architects in Glasgow, and within 3 years, there were 5 people working on 3 different projects, all significant and all won through competitions. The smallest was also the highest profile, the Mac Gallery at the Lighthouse, which Dayan Sujic, director of the Glasgow UK City of Architecture and Design in 1999, described as probably the worst burden to expect a Glasgow-educated architect to tackle. Adding of Gareth, but he emerged unscathed. He was named Young Architecture of the Year in 2000, and Gareth's consummate skill in networking and communication and the growing reputation of the practice brought forth several opportunities to compete for steadily larger and more high-profile projects. The practice won many of these through competitions, in no small part through the clarity of thinking and elegant diagrammatic presentations of spatial ideas. Among many RIBA and RIS and other design awards. The Bridge Art Centre at Easter House and Mario Music and Cinema venue on the Shetlands were mid-listed for the Sterling Prize. In 2003, Gareth Hoskins Architects won the international competition for the £47 million redevelopment of the National Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh, which was completed, at least the first phase, in 2011. And this won the Andrew Doolan Award for the best building in Scotland. The practice won and completed several highly regarded projects in arts, healthcare, housing and master planning, with many of them recognised through awards, but some of the smaller projects attracting equal attention in wider architectural circles, such as the Architecture for All Gallery at the Victoria and Albert Museum in 2004 in London, and the first ever Scottish Pavilion at the Venice Biennale in 2008. Gareth embraced every challenge with equal enthusiasm. He was heavily involved in developing current proposals in the office for projects at the Royal High School in Edinburgh and also the Scottish National Gallery. As well as practicing architecture, Gareth became deeply engaged with the promotion of architecture and design. He was involved in Architecture and Design Scotland from its inception in 2005 as a board member and regularly chaired its design review panels. He was the Scottish Government's National Healthcare Design Champion from 2006 to 2010. In 2008, he was made a Fellow of the Royal Corporation of Architects in Scotland, and the following year he was elected to the Royal Scottish Academy. He was recognised with an OBE for services to architecture in 2010. The practice, now Hoskins Architects, has continued to grow and has several major projects on the board. Its formal establishment of a Berlin office came in 2014, having secured a range of commissions in Berlin, Munich, and the most significant refurbishment of the World Museum in Vienna, which has just started on site. Those who knew Gareth knew his warmth, his persuasiveness and determination, his ability to listen and his high standards. Gareth had a rare combination of real talent and total conviction about his own views, together with a genuine openness to others' ideas, and was able to combine those together in a greater whole. Gareth, founder and managing director of Hoskins Architects, died suddenly in January of this year, and Scotland lost a great man, a great architect, and all at Hoskins Architects have lost a great friend. He leaves an architectural legacy of some excellent buildings, which you can see on the screen, and the office with a continuing and positive contribution to make to Scottish architecture. Thank you.
Now, I've got a lot of views on this subject, but I'm going to keep them to myself. If I'm going to try to keep them to myself, I'll try to be impartial. I've got my notebook. First of all, I want to say I completely agree with what Chris has said. Gareth was a wonderful guy, he really was, and it would be very embarrassing if he could hear me say that about him, but he's a truly life-enhancing person. And just when I was listening to Chris there, I remember we used to, I was on the Architecture and Design Scotland panel along with Gareth. He wasn't just a brilliant architect, he was a brilliant critic. And people took his criticism because they knew it was so good. It's a very difficult job to make a critique of an architectural scheme and not to completely annoy the person that you're actually, the architect you're talking to, because after all, they've designed it. And that was yet another skill that he had. Now, I used to meet Gareth from quite a lot, and quite often on the train from Glasgow to Edinburgh. One day we got talking about, of all things, Partick Bowling Club, which is just about 100 yards up the road here, and I was a member of that club, and was telling him about all of our woes, which was declining membership, declining building. A clubhouse is literally falling to bits. And he said that he would have a studio. I don't know if you remember this, Chris, but they had a studio within, so a design discussion within his office for the architects, so kind of practice session, a theoretical thing, and they came up with some brilliant ideas. He also commissioned a survey of the sites, so at last we knew exactly what belonged to us. We then introduced Noah, the developer, but small scale, very nice developer. And to cut a very long story short, the project is nearly finished. Gareth got the job of designing it, and of course he was a businessman as well as an architect. And they've produced something which, when it's all finished, will be a beautiful thing. But it's a piece of development within the townscape, and it's respectful. But I'm risk getting into a value judgment there. We're here tonight to decide well, on three questions really that I want you to have in mind, if you would please, as we listen to our four presenters. What we're going to do is we'll have a presentation of about 7 minutes each from the presenters, and we'll throw it open to debate, discussion, statement, and we hope we have a frank and open discussion, don't we? But the three questions that we're interested in exploring are, what are Glasgow's key sightlines and iconic buildings? The second question is, do we need to protect our views? And what provisions should we put in place to do this as the city develops? So, are Glasgow's views so precious that they need to be identified and protected? And finally, when and where should we allow buildings to rise above the skyline? So, you can have these questions in mind, and when we're discussing afterwards on the basis of the presentations that we've had, we'll then follow on with the discussion. Now, I'd first like to ask Neil Murphy, who's a conservation architect and a very well-known conservation architect, and someone who's passionately interested in heritage. Neil, thank you.
Thank you, Ranald. Okay, I'm here. I kind of got paranoid this minute, so apologies, but very handily, I had a previous presentation done on this to the Royal Town Planning Institute about 7 years ago. So, and actually reviewing it this afternoon, it was like, actually, this covers most of the issues that we're going to be talking about today. So it, in some ways, it just shows how cyclical things are in Glasgow. So where I'm coming from is I've been a member of Glasgow's Urban Design Panel for a very long time, since its inception, actually. So I've seen an awful lot of tall buildings proposals in Glasgow, and I've been involved in one or two of them as well, but I've also been involved in tall buildings proposals elsewhere in the world. So it's something I'm actually quite interested in. So what I was actually doing with this presentation was a critique of Glasgow's tall buildings policies at that time, but it's still actually quite pertinent because tall buildings policy is actually being rewritten for the city at the moment. So many of the points I'll be touching on will hopefully still make sense. So first off, okay, calculating average life altitude. Now this is something you do, and it's according to where you have lived throughout your life. You know, what floor level have you lived on throughout your life? So in my instance, my average life altitude is actually the 5th floor. So there you go, and so you can work out your own. And at the moment, actually, that's been distorted because I've been living in a first floor flat for the last 17 years. So it has come down quite a bit from what it used to be, and there's a reason for that. I come from Hong Kong, so which is the city with the most number of tall buildings over 20 stories in the world, and it far eclipses Manhattan. So a hyperdense city. Loads of tall buildings, so I've been involved in a couple of tall buildings proposals there. And in actual fact, that view that you're seeing there is very roughly, that was the view from the flat that we actually lived in Hong Kong. So it's a very privileged life out there, but lovely part of the world. So and that means I kind of have something in common with quite a lot of people in Glasgow, because I kind of can understand where the Gilly Peace song is coming from in Adam McNaughton, because I kind of know what that means. So, and of course, this also interests me too, because Glasgow kind of had this great leap forward, heroic leap forward, with this whole kind of vision of how the city could be remade and taken away from its Victorian past and recast as a vision sort of with this sort of mid-20th century vision of the future of ring roads and tall buildings and how that would all work together to create this better city for living in, modeled on the machine for living. So, but of course, at the same time, we have to acknowledge that that led to an erosion of Glasgow's Commonwealth. And did anyone really think about the spaces in between all of these tall buildings, or how those tall buildings sat together on Glasgow's skyline, which is a major issue for the city? So, why go tall now? Because it's sexy. So, if you're a typical local politician and you're looking to regenerate your city, this, a tall building gives you credibility. So this is a good thing to do. So at the same time, you have to be conscious as well of other cities with tall buildings that we admire actually have quite a proactive stance towards their skyline. So there's several of them that are worth looking at. So for instance, with New York, the whole way that New York, how you get kind of two CBDs, central business districts in New York, at the tip of Manhattan, lower Manhattan, then in Midtown in Manhattan, and you get the dip in between the two. Now that's partially caused by geology, but one of the things that New Yorkers have decided is that they want that to be their skyline. They don't want to kind of fill in the midsection so that their skyline suddenly morphs away. So they want these kind of two kind of edges to their city. And then Vancouver, who have been quite, particularly with the amount of capital that's coming from the Far East and Hong Kong in particular, who have really kind of tried to take that model which kind of developed in Hong Kong, but adapt it to a much more urban context. So, and it's quite an interesting model too for how it hits the ground level and how they handle having a tower, but with better facilities around the base. So there are things to look at there. Berlin, where there are clusters of tall buildings. Frankfurt's doing something similar as well. So those are the things we have to look at. We have to identify things like key views. So this, at one point, was a proposal for a tall building on the huge gap site, which is now getting infilled on Bothwell Street, between Bothwell Street and Waterloo Street. And one of the things that we were trying to point out as the Glasgow Urban Design Panel was you had to think about how that tall building actually impacted on the skyline and what kind of key views did it affect. In this case, the view down Ingram Street towards Royal Exchange Square and Goma, because you were going to get this top of this tower kind of slicing off the sky directly behind the dome of Goma. What would that look like? So, and then here's other things, how not to terminate a view. So these are all blasts from the past for some people. Some people on the panel might recognize some of them. Yeah. But there was this whole debate about how did you conclude the vista down Buchanan Street. And at one point there were 3 different schemes competing to complete the vista, and all of which got planning consent. So if they'd all been built, it would have been a little bit of a higgledy-piggledy mess. And that's the kind of thing Glasgow has to be very careful with, because obviously Glaswegians love a pond of view. So, and height, not bulk. This was a classic. This one where we were told that, of course, you wouldn't see the floors that were all in glass. They would just disappear into the sky. And, I can't think how many times we've been told this, and you kind of groan and roll your eyes when you see it. Height, not bulk, please. And then the 3Ds, design is important. So this kept coming back to us. This was a proposal which has now gone nowhere, but it was for a hotel on a very kind of, it was right next door to the City Inn that's just next door to Central Station. So, and it kept coming back and getting redesigned and refined, and it was trying to get across the idea that design is actually really important for tall buildings. So don't neglect it. And this was something that I was also interested in as well. This is Carol Willis's excellent book, Form Follows Finance, which is all about how the various building codes of New York and Chicago developed. And what she discusses in that is the idea of a vernacular for capitalism. And was this something that began to be developed in Glasgow? So you've got James Miller's sorry, not James Miller, James Hammond Jr.'s hat rack building, he was involved in the skyscraper race with James Thompson's son and also with J.J. Burnett at that point, and he managed to get this past the Dean of Guild with 10 stories, whereas others couldn't get past 8. So, and there was a whole, like, how do you treat the skyline, which he handles so brilliantly in that building. So, and things like, do we use the urban model, the 3D model of the city, to proactively shape the skyline, to see how tall buildings can fit into that, and use that in the way that Hong Kong, Vancouver, Edinburgh, and Frankfurt do. So that's something that Glasgow should really think about as well. Microclimate, absolutely key. One of the things I was involved in Glasgow was Elphinstone Place. This is quite some time ago now. And that took a record 92 runs in the wind tunnel to get right. And the reason for that is, in planning terms, you're not allowed to make things worse than the current condition. And one of the things with our first scheme for it, we in fact were making wind conditions really bad right in front of the entrance to McClure Naismiths, this big solicitors firm. Would you want to do that if you were going to get sued by them? Possibly not a good idea. So, for instance, Toronto, for instance, has all these kind of great diagrams to show how to handle wind conditions. So it's something that we should really think about. But does Glasgow need to go tall? So look at all these areas of utilised land around the city centre. We need to think about this too. Maybe we should be filling them in first. And then speculation versus loss of heritage. These sort of great Greek Thompson buildings, Candleriggs, the finest post-medieval street in the city. Where is it now? It's vanished. Greek Thompson, more Greek Thompson disappearing. And then we actually look at the statistics of this. So this is the New World Trade Center in New York. So that's 240,000 square meters of office space in the one building. But there was, and this was back in 2009, there was at that time 300,000 square meters of empty space in Glasgow City Centre. Do you really need to go tall when you have all that space sitting there? And if we start to renovate that, you could get potentially between an extra 6,000 to 9,000 people living in the city centre. So maybe that is something we need to think about first. The health of our buildings and getting people back into them. So that's...
Thank you very much indeed, Neil.
Probably all know our work. We are known for our conservation work and our work with listed buildings, but this evening I'm going to talk a little bit about one of our buildings and its context in the city, and how modern buildings and high-rise can actually, bring diversity and richness to the city. And obviously this skyline here is iconic now, and yet these buildings are very new, but yet the crane is part of our history. So I think Glasgow always changes and morphs, and that's what's brilliant about it, because old icons and modern icons can just sit quite kind of harmoniously together, as long as they're well done. So this is a view that I love. My in-laws live in Troon, and we quite often tootle off at the weekend to Troon, but when I come back from Troon, which is usually a bit traumatic when you meet the in-laws, and I come over the hill at Darnley and I see the kind of skyline of Glasgow, and it's amazing. It always astounds me because it's got so many scales of buildings and so much high-rise. When you see the city in its entirety, you realise how much high-rise we do have, and it's in over all sectors, it's not just city centre. And then when you come in off the M77, you come over the Kingston Bridge, again you get this fantastic view of the city, and it really is, an international city with the river there, and all the developments that we have there in the kind of business district. And then, I don't know if any of you have noticed the new high-rise that's appearing at Charing Cross. Well, that's Page Park building. So it shows that, when we need to, we can be bold and we can build high-rise. Now this is one of our drawings that we did for the project, and we've actually got to house 1,900 workers in this building. It's the Scottish Power headquarters, and what that's doing is, at the moment, all the Scottish Power workers are distributed all around the city. What's going to happen here is they're all going to come together and work together. So for Scottish Power, that's brilliant because they're bringing their workers together so there's more communication and they can work more efficiently. But for the city, it's fantastic as well, because what these workers will do is kind of bring life and I suppose customers to all the cafes, the bars, the shops, and so these buildings actually feed all our cultural buildings, because at the moment, all these folk are out in Cathcart and all on the outskirts of the city, so bringing them into the city is actually really helping that dynamism. And obviously, this will have, is having an effect on the skyline, and I'll come on to other photos of this later. What we've done is actually broken down the mass of this building, so you've actually got smaller elements and tall elements. And even within the building, we've created courtyards and atriums which help break down this mass, so it's not a huge slab block. And also going back to the wind effect, we had to go down to London and have wind testing done in the wind tunnel at Arrows. And what we've created at the ground floor of this building is an arcade. So actually the pedestrians that walk at the ground level are protected from the downdraft, because it is an issue. And that also brings an intimacy to the building, because when you're looking into the building, you're not looking up at this huge scale. You're looking into the cafe area, you're looking into the courtyard, you're looking into the reception. So actually, the building is animated at that level. You get close to the building. Now, it's funny that we're all using these international images of cities, because obviously the key thing to high-rise is, in cities, land is expensive, and you can't sprawl out. And when a city is very dense, the only way you can go up is up. So here, this iconic view of Chicago is almost looking at Chicago from the outside. You know, it's like Manhattan as well. You look at Manhattan from the outside, and that's quite a kind of romantic view. What have I put here? It's got excitement, it's got beauty, but it's a kind of an ethereal image. It's not real as such. Glasgow were a bit more real. So this is, I think Neil, you use this view as well. This is the view from the lighthouse viewing platform, which is fantastic, because you see the whole of the city and you see how it changed actually, because even that building was built 17 years ago, and even then the skyline's changed so much from when we built that. But what you can see here is it's the lower level buildings that were built in the kind of 19th century, and it's almost like a valley. And again, it was like the New York example, where you've got this dip in the centre of the city. So all our historic buildings are like the base of the valley, and then as you spread out from the historic centre, the buildings get taller. So it's almost like they're the hills. So Glasgow does have this very kind of gentle kind of landscape of buildings. And also, obviously, as the city grew, the land did become more expensive, and that's why we're going up higher on the edge of the city centre. I think what we're wanting to say here is there is a harmony that you can have with the historic buildings and the new buildings. And the key thing is to actually embed the new buildings into the city. And George Square has always been quite dynamic centre, but the building of College and Printing, I mean, that was obviously quite dramatic when it was built, but it's now part of the backdrop, and it's part of the skyline of George Square. I think if that building got demolished, people might be quite upset, because it's been there and it's an icon, you know. If you might hate it, I love it, you know, and it's got, people make Glasgow all over it now, so it's kind of a landmark in itself. So, you know, I think that's a great contribution. And it's funny, we're all using this image as well, because obviously looking towards this is the Tron Church here. In the background you can see there are tall buildings. In fact, the one on the right is now complete, and they're almost like flanking the church and almost kind of providing kind of backdrop to it. So tall and modern buildings can enhance the historic buildings. And again, here, another brute. I'm kind of defending the brutes here. Here we've got the dental hospital, which again you probably don't love. But if you can see here how it actually, the lower plinth is in harmony with the, is it the Egyptian chambers? The Greek Thompson building. And actually, Grecian chambers. And then, as CCA, actually I should know that because I worked on that 20 years ago. But then you've got the tall block on top of that. So actually, I think that building is a good example of embedding in the city with the modern and the historic being side by side. And again, there's another view here of the Scottish Power building, but you can see how within that business district it does actually harmonise. So I think if you are building tall buildings, you've got to respect the scale in the context of where you are. Don't just put a high building next to lots of smaller buildings. You've actually got to respect the grade of the city at times. And I think also the key for tall buildings is the pedestrian, respect pedestrians. I think the more dense that we create the city, I think the more space we have to create for pedestrians to respect the pedestrian, because they're obviously just at that ground floor level when the buildings are towering above them. I mean, here you can see our Scottish Power building and how it's kind of broken up. This is the kind of the back elevation really, and it is broken up to actually create almost like 3 buildings. And then as you see on this front elevation where it looks over the motorway, it's dropped right down to the level of the old Strathclyde regional offices. So I think if you do design tall buildings with respect to buildings around them, they are a great asset to the city. And it's amazing that Scottish Power have actually built their headquarters in Glasgow. It's a huge investment for the city, so that shows great confidence in our city. So that's
Carol, thanks very much. So, I think they're one each, would you say, at half-time? There are 2 really great talks, international and the contextual. I think we've got a lot to think about. Well, next is Jude Barber, and Jude is a principal working with Collective. And was you've been on them for years and years. But Jude, if you could say a wee bit about yourself as well, just before you start. Thanks very much.
Okay, I'm just checking the mic's on. Yep. You can hear me? Great, thanks. Okay, thanks everyone. I work at Collective Architecture. For those of you that don't know the practice, we're based in both Glasgow and Edinburgh, and about 40 people. We're a cooperative and work mainly in sort of the housing sector and arts and cultural sector, but we kind of do anything, to be honest. So I'm here representing the work of our practice, but also really sort of woven some of our work really into sort of Glasgow context, because we've worked in Glasgow now for about 20 years. And primarily in the periphery, and we see our work sort of moving, as we sort of grow in age and stature, find ourselves moving slowly into the centre, and that's quite an interesting journey for us. So our perspective does come from the outside in, I suppose. And this is an image of the window from our office, which is in the old market building. I don't know if you know the Gushet building, just at the bottom of the high street, where it meets the salt market. And what we love about this image is, one, we get incredible light coming into the office, and you can't quite see it here, but from our office we can see the needle of the Glasgow Green, we can see the brewery, we can see the Gorbals high-rises from the 60s, we can see St Andrews in the Square. On the other side we see the M74 being constructed, we see Glasgow College going up, we see the Merchants House. So we see this kind of rich tapestry and this really, really diverse landscape that Glasgow provides. And for an architect that is super exciting actually, and very sort of stimulating. But the one thing I kind of wanted to really focus a bit this talk on actually was about power. And I think when we talk about skylines, we have to understand social economic constructs that created those sort of dominant punctuations of our skyline. And this is, I kind of like this quote from Diane Sujic in his Edifice Complex, which you can imagine what that's all about, is that it is all about power. And there's another quote I like, which is by Rowan Moore, which is the architecture is about power, and the question is for whom, by whom, and to whom. And I think that's something that Collective likes to think about. And I suppose when we think about how Glasgow was formed, it was based on really the reason Glasgow grew so quickly was because of its location on the Clyde and its geology. So, before the even city, there were sort of predetermined sort of topographical issues that really determined Glasgow. And as you saw there, with the church and its ideological and economic power, it popped above. The universities and their intellectual power and dominance, they showed that in the skyline. and especially in terms of thinking about the pattern and the evolution of Glasgow and its urban grain, it's mainly because of the mercantile past. And actually your sort of African and Caribbean fellow kind of men and women are kind of, they sort of dedicate these kind of incredible buildings to sort of our mercantile past and our transatlantic trading past. This is the Merchant Steeple, the Brigate, and this is the Ramshorn Church, both funded through transatlantic trading. And we kind of like to explore these issues. We did a project called Empire Cafe for the Commonwealth Games, which tried to have kind of conversation about that, because a democracy of its past is not qualified either to analyse the present or shape its future. Andy Whiteman said that, who's a real hero of mine, the land reformer who wrote The Poor Had No Lawyers. We're working, I think another power in the city is creative power, and it's interesting that, you know, the Merchant Steeple came from this sort of kind of dark past of our history, but now we're seeing, you know, the creative arts and dance and performance and such like happening in the Brigate, and this is the redevelopment of that into a dance centre on the Clyde that we're working on, and again it's trying to respect those historic lines, railways and infrastructure on the Clyde, and this is the new extension in development at the moment on the Clyde. Another form of power in Glasgow is obviously of industrial power, our kind of incredible industrial heritage that we have. And this is one of the earliest projects which were in the practice what you call Chris Stewart architects. This is the water towers in Easter House in Garthunlick, and the communities there on these kind of hills of Garthunlick saw these water towers as a problem. They were falling into disrepair, they were kind of considered ugly. And this lighting project that Chris and Adrian worked on was really looking to kind of illuminate those up and light them up. And they now form beacons to these sort of formerly forgotten kind of communities in Easter House in Garthunlick. And they're very well loved now. Again, this is a quote I love from Liz Davidson, which talks about kind of the courage and optimism of preserving our industrial structures in our past. And I think what's really interesting about things like the cranes in Govan and the Finiston crane and the works is that these were actually engineering these were practical solutions to some industrial problems and challenges. And what did I actually want to say? I would say that actually they're of incredible heritage and cultural value, and sort of deserve to be retained, and often these are popping their head above the parapet as well and saying this is important and this is a valuable part of Glasgow's heritage. And in 2007 we refurbished the crane with Clydebank, rebuilt into a lighting project and developed into a visitor centre on the Clyde. And this particular, I picked this vista because this is one of my favourite views in Glasgow. I live on the south side, and this is from Queen's Park. And it's kind of interesting that some of the best views in the city are from these hills like the metropolis and Queen's Park and such like. And for me, I like this because it does show the rich tapestry of like faith, education, industry, all kind of brought into one. But the thing I like about this image isn't necessarily things that pop up. It's the ordinariness and the regularity and the wonderfulness of the tenement roofs and that datum that is set, and that's something that is consistent around many, many parts of the city. The kind of non-iconic, you know, the everyday, the housing, the role that housing plays in establishing our identity in the city. So I think I just wanted to kind of highlight that's something that we need to value and nurture when we're talking about our skylines. And as Karen mentioned, the city is surrounded by tall buildings on its periphery, and this is a picture from Disappearing Glasgow by the wonderful photographer Chris Leslie, who actually I hadn't realised quite how significant it was. Since 2000, in the last 10 years, we've demolished 30% of the city's high-rise flats on the periphery. And we know this because we are working in these areas to sort of almost rebuild in and around those sites. And one of the quotes I liked from the historian Barnabas Calder in Chris's great book. He's got a book launch on actually on Sunday, I think Saturday or Sunday. Anyway, it doesn't matter, so I shouldn't do a promotion for Chris Leslie, but he's wonderful, check his website. That Barnabas Calder said, the 1960s housing crusade, however unfashionable now, was a sincere and urgent attempt to improve the conditions of those who most needed it. And the structures of previous generations memorialised periods of staggering wealth, and some was bought for the price of industrial squalor and grinding poverty for many more. So those beautiful spires and churches and things that we see, you know, were really, the staggering wealth is the right term. And this housing crusade, I know it isn't popular, but it was a brave and it was a bold move in the city's history. And I think the challenge for us now is that we find us in a city centre with the predominance of land values and the challenges that that faces. We're seeing these sort of developments going up in large slabs, as we mentioned. There's some good examples. I'm not sort of necessarily here to sort of put that argument forward, but there is a challenge between derelict land and vacant sites and significantly tall buildings going up, and there's a real disconnect between those two things. And Rem Koolhaas, OMA, calls it bigness. And I quite like that because it stops me getting into an economic discussion that I really can't argue. And by calling it bigness, he highlights that obviously structures are taller and deeper and bigger than ever conceived before. And bigness doesn't need the city anymore. Bigness doesn't need Glasgow. It competes with Glasgow. Bigness is urbanism versus architecture. It's not a marrying of those things. And I think now the wealth in our nations, they're not displayed in splendour as they were before. They're hidden, they're tucked away, and they don't get put into the architecture. So what Rem Koolhaas also says is that not all architecture, not all programmes, and not all of that events will be swallowed by bigness. There are some needs that are too weak, too defiant to be part of the constellations of bigness. And I think we're very fortunate that we have a housing association movement, we have cultural organisations, and we have people that are willing to work with a modest scale and with a strength of character to deliver the needs of the communities in Glasgow. So these are just some examples of wonderful work with Page and Park, Eldridge Cannon, Arnswell Christie and ourselves, just some of the examples of these extraordinary housing associations such as Gorbals Housing Association, Glasgow Housing Association, Sanctuary Housing Association, doing some incredible work in this field, I would suggest. And it comes back to the idea of the antithesis of iconic. It's not necessarily iconic. And so I'm just going to put this in at the end because to sort of add to that conversation about bigness versus ordinary, this is a map from 19, oh no, it's wrong, it's not 19, oh no, the slide's right, 1900, I was saying 1990, 1900. And the green sections there are the parks and the plains of Glasgow. And again, when we're talking about height, I think we also need to think about the bits in between. And I think Glasgow has these incredible assets around, and from these parks we can enjoy our skyline and our city. And to remain as the Dear Green place, I would say that one of the things that to be protected most is actually our parks and the invisible value that these offer us in terms of ecology, air quality, water management. And these truly are one of the last few completely public places in our city, and I think that to be valued because they do benefit everyone. And it's not really talking about the skyline, but I think the ground and the water are as valuable as that which pops up from it. So.
Thanks very much. That is relevant, Jude, because where you have density, you need parks. And so density creates parks, it creates services. So I'm straying into my views now. But listen, just the parks, if I may add one thing, the disappearing Glasgow thing, I think is brilliant. And it's interesting because when I was coming into this sort of business, there was a kind of heritage panic, a moral panic about heritage, and there was a book produced in Glasgow called The City That Disappeared. So, but that was another city. This city that's now disappearing is the one that my kids, who are all in their 20s, they've grown up with that, so that they could feel connected with it in the same way that we connected with Victorian architecture, if that's not too convoluted a point I'm making. So the thing that you've grown up with is the thing that you become nostalgic about when it starts to disappear, no matter what that is, almost. But Chris Coleman-Smith from Gareth Hoskins Architects is going to come onto the stage again, and he's going to have his own views about Skyline architecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So yes, I'm Chris Coleman-Smith, Director at Hoskins Architects, and we have a practice of people based in Glasgow and Berlin, two different, interesting, similar cities. And we're involved in a range of projects, primarily, I guess, best known for, but we deal with residential health projects, more commercial projects these days, master plans, and everything else that you can think of as well. I'm new to Glasgow. I've only been here since 2000, so I can talk about the city. Is it gone again?
Yeah, you're away.
I've got the full mic. Is that bad?
No.
Or just talk louder?
Do you want this one?
Is that okay? I'll just hold it like this. So yeah, I'm new to Glasgow. I've only been here since 2000, and what a great city we live in. It's fantastic, and I can say that as someone coming from England, someone who did my thesis project in the city many years ago when I was a student in Sheffield, and became really interested in Glasgow. It's a fascinating place. And so I'm not talking about international examples. I'm just going to talk about what a great city we live in, really. And I suppose the introduction to the talk was about what an exciting, vibrant place we live. And I do believe that's true. And I guess I'd always also like to talk about a bit about the approach that our practice has to buildings and designing buildings. And a lot of that is to do with understanding the history and the context of the projects and the places that we're designing, and not just on a local level, but on a wider city level as well. And you know all this, but it's been great for me just to have a look at it again and get out the books and just really have a good look at Glasgow again and enjoy experiencing the city and looking around it. Because obviously Glasgow is constantly changing. It's been changing since its first creation, and it's been influenced by a number of different factors which have varied over the years, from religion, trade, manufacturing, heavy industry, including shipbuilding and the railways, which have also had a massive impact on the city at the time when they came in and demolished big swathes of the city, much like the developments that we've also seen in the 60s and 70s, and the big motorway that came through the city and the impact that had. And the rise and fall, which has been talked about, of the 60s tower blocks and slab blocks. And the legacy that they leave us, the big swathes of land. Again, that argument, which was quite interesting, was presented. You've got all this land available, which has been cleared in the 60s to put on these tower blocks, and now we're taking down these tower blocks. Surely there's space there to develop. And the answer to that is, of course, yes, there is that space, but there's also the demand in the city centre for office space, retail space, leisure space, where people want to be, where businesses want to be, and where development takes place. So I'm really interested in how Glasgow's developed, as probably many of you are, and it's been very much a gradual process, I guess, from its starting points around the cathedral and this gradual move west. And that's been, the city has also been incredibly influenced by the topography, which has created some incredible places and spaces and views and vistas. And part of this is about maybe protecting some of those, but also enhancing some, but certainly working with the existing character of the city to see how we can work with it, and so we can route projects to the place that is Glasgow. So obviously fantastic views from the metropolis, as Jude mentioned, and the merchant city, very different in character, very much about being in the space. And I thought some of the things that Karen was saying as well about the views and the new buildings, the Skyline issues about how they can actually enhance the existing buildings and space. But it's not just about looking into the city, it's also about what you see in the city, looking out and around, and what you see looking down the street. And of course, the the development that took place as the city moved west up Blythswood, and the gradual stepping up as the buildings step up to the Blythswood Square at the top, which is quite an interesting thing to observe, and really I think enhances the the value of the ups and downs of the city that you can read in the buildings and the skyline. And then, of course, the West and the universities and education and how the impact that's had on the skyline, and the importance of that as well, and Park Circus, how that sits as a landmark and a focal point in the city. So both important things, as well as the views from the south and around the city. So I was quite interested just to look again, well, what does the Glasgow City Council say about that? What does Historic Scotland say about this? And so, they have done work, and there is stuff that we can look at and review, and does it go far enough? Is that enough to guide the development of the city? And maybe there's an argument that says, actually, we need to do more. We need to understand the city better, and we need to prepare and develop a strategy for buildings that are going to come along, and developers who do want to build taller in specific locations, whether that be for student housing, with the issues that raises, or the next thing that might happen, PRS rental, private rental housing, which is probably the next thing that's going to come along to cities throughout the UK. So there's been some work, and there's the conservation areas in the city. This is just obviously the city centre conservation area, which includes some quite interesting places, such as the International Financial District along the Clyde, interestingly. It includes the area by Strathclyde University as you go up the hill to the Glasgow College's buildings, also referred to by Karen, listed buildings and special and important in their own right. So it's nice that actually some of these buildings are being recognised as significant in the city. Some of these spaces are being recognised as significant in the city, but maybe there's more work to be done here. So I mean, in summary, I guess, is this one working? Yeah, it's still working. Protecting the interests of the city conservation area. I think that these are great aims, by the way. Maintaining strategic views of established landmarks. Interesting, let's identify actually what that means. Which landmarks are we talking about? Is it the ones that I've illustrated in these slides? I think it is those. And making a positive contribution to the skyline. Now that's an interesting one, isn't it? That's open to interpretation by many different people. It would be nice to have something that maybe you could refer to and say, well, actually, is this good development? I know that London's going through a huge debate about their skyline and development in the cluster, which is gradually now spreading from that cluster and eroding that argument about how the city develops. So obviously there's also the city plan as well as the conservation area information. And that talks about tall buildings. And the International Financial District also, which is in the which is in the conservation area, at least partly. Is that really good enough for Glasgow? I'm not sure it is. Could tall buildings actually enhance that and create something that was more interesting and less sterile? I think it probably could. And this is a qualitative issue, I guess, about the quality of the buildings that we're designing and developing, and how that relates to the wider city and the wider context. So I suppose, in summary, and this is a view that everyone's shown, so it's probably quite nice to use this as a final slide. Glasgow is constantly changing. It's a dynamic place. It's a great place to live and work. Yes, it's going to change in the future, and yes, we should enable that to change. We should let future generations have their input into the city. We do need to preserve what we've got. We've got some fantastic spaces. There is some opportunity, however, to develop new places and new architecture to fill some of those gaps that have been left around the city and on the edge of the city centre as well. Our approach is very much understanding the context in which buildings sit, whether they be tall or small, and that includes obviously the history and the character of the place and spaces that we're designing for, and understanding the wider context. What does that mean for the wider views and the wider city to build in these places that we're looking at? And above all, making that positive contribution and enhancing the city in the skyline, but also in many other ways. So I shall leave it on that note. Thank you.
That was a very thought-provoking talk, and the thoughts it provoked me was about the various World Heritage Site issues that have come up in the last 10 years or so. First we had Vienna Mitte, which is tall buildings that were going to affect the setting of the city. We had Cologne Cathedral, we've had Liverpool, we've also had Tower of London, and closer to home, New Lanark, Edinburgh, which was actually visited by a UNESCO visitation to see if the World Heritage status might be put at risk. So this is a big, big deal when that's going to happen. As far as I know, it's only happened once that World Heritage status has been removed, but even the threat of it is not a very good thing politically, culturally, or any other way. And it gives support to people who object to large-scale development. Separating objection for its own sake and objection on aesthetic grounds is always a difficult thing. And if we're going to give more power, which I think we should, to communities to decide these issues, then we have to make sure that we're part of the debate, we understand the financial, the political side of all of this, as well as simply knee-jerk objections on the grounds of size. So we need to understand, and I include myself in this, we need to understand the full context before we make judgments. Now, that was another homily there I managed to slip in, but we want now to hear from you. I don't know if you're bursting to disagree or agree or make your own statement or ask a question, but if you have a question, please ask it, and then I'll pass it on to the members of the panel who would like to answer it, or even who would not like to answer it.
Wonder if the panel have any ideas. If somebody wanted to build a 60 or 70 story building like the Shard in London and Glasgow, where would they put it?
Saying that the International Financial Services District was going to have a tower, in fact 2 towers, one in Robertson Street I think, and the other one on Argyle Street, which was a massive tower designed by the Manchester architecture design that Ian Simpson, and that, interestingly enough, is way out of scale for Manchester, but it's become an icon of the city, interestingly enough. I think it's another reasonable example that we might think of. Can I ask you to come back on the question about the Shard?
I think the problem with that is you need a cluster in order to contain that Shard, and Glasgow just doesn't have that at the moment. It is beginning to develop a cluster in some places at the top of Solihull Street, where you've got the UGC and the Premier Inn, and there's a Stalin brand building that's being proposed for the BHS site, and you can see how they are trying to kind of form that into a cluster with the other Ryder Architects building just down the way, whose name escapes me, but it's Paramount, I think. Yeah. It's next door to the Odeon Cinema, what's left of the Odeon Cinema. Yeah. So there is kind of a cluster forming there. But what I think Glasgow has to think really carefully about is, for me, the kind of the 60s experience, and I find it quite depressing compared to what was being developed in Hong Kong, where the British were really successful at producing a social housing model in tall buildings, which didn't seem to work quite so well here, for reasons I suspect this was the testing ground, and in Hong Kong they got it right. But when I look at Glasgow in particular, I mean, particularly when looking at Karen's first slide of the road back from True, we had to go and assess that when we were doing Elphinstone Place, and it was actually really difficult to pick out Glasgow city centre in that, because the towers are all over the place.
Just say where Elphinstone Place was,
Yes.
because it's interesting. It's on the campus site.
It's on the Scottish Power site, and actually I have to say I am relieved that the Scottish Power building has been built on that site, because I had a major crisis of kind of conscience, faith, I don't know, over Elphinstone Place, because when we finally got into the wind tunnel, and I could see it in context of the whole of the city centre as a 3D model, I was like, what am I doing? I'm going to actually wreck Glasgow with this thing. And
that building.
That was 39 stories. And I'm still not convinced about how it sat on the Skyline, and had major reservations about it. And I still think now that Glasgow needs to think about infilling first. And then, once you get particularly the south of the Clyde and the north of the city, once you start getting good urban fabric back in there, and those sites that are empty filled in, then start thinking about going tall and think really carefully about it. Yeah. Because Glasgow does have those strategic views, and they tend to be quite contained views. But things like the Ingram Street corridor, there's a fantastic view to the north down Crown Street, which probably nobody notices. But if you stand in the new Goldfields Park and you look directly to the north, you've got a great view of the Tron steeple, beautifully framed. And it's those things that Glasgow really has to look at. They're beautiful views, and Glasgow really needs to pay good license to them.
And
Chris? Yeah, sure. Okay, everybody here? Is that all good? That's good, thank you, Jude. I suppose I was going to refer to that Manchester building as well. I was, but in Simpson, just because it is such a dramatic statement on Manchester. And as you come across the hills and Peter Street and down, you see this huge tower sticking out. But it's a very different context to Glasgow, and it kind of works because it is, it's so strikingly different. It's very flat in comparison to Glasgow. And I think, obviously there's many different aspects to Glasgow, and there's many interesting features in the topography. But looking from the south side towards the city, you can see these layers, and probably coming down on that road from Tube, you can see these layer upon layer, which go back, if you like. And I think it's important that that's retained somehow. So the infill idea, that's great. The reality is that we're dealing with developers who aren't necessarily going to engage in the debate or discussion. And I love the idea as well that maybe Glasgow shouldn't be such a central city. Maybe we should look at how we can change that. Now that's a really interesting thing to explore, I think. But I suspect that this discussion is going to be forced, not necessarily by the great and the good, but by financial issues. And I think it's important to have a position as a city about where we think we can accommodate taller buildings, and is it appropriate in the city centre? And to be really robust in an argument, in a discussion that says, actually, no, sorry guys, we're not going to let you build that there, and this is why. And I do get the sense that we're not prepared for that, and the planners don't necessarily have the teeth to be able to say that to a project that comes into the city that promises great wealth and great opportunities, bringing maybe an international organisation into the city. How do you guide that, and how do you strategically place that in a place that actually really works for the city? And I think there is a discussion to be had about that, and how we can do that.
Jude, can I come back to you in a minute? I want to ask this gentleman here what you would like to say.
Okay, if you're walking down one of the streets in the city centre as a pedestrian, you're looking up, you see a skyline, but you're attracted mostly, at least I am, to the facades of the buildings. What you can't see from there, and you can see in that image from the lighthouse, is that there's a village living at the top of the skyline. Wherever you are, there's these little residences, houses, gardens. There's a village in the sky. So it's not seen in its potential richness. And I wondered if you would comment on how do we make it rich to be at the point of the skyline in Glasgow.
That's actually something that Carol Willis in her book Form Follows Function does focus in on. And it was all about how Chicago, as a way of competing with New York, one of the things that they did with their tall buildings policy from the sort of 1920s and 30s onwards was that they insisted that you could only build kind of, if you could build so high, but in order to get higher, you had to begin to sculpt the building thereafter. So you had to think about how that building finish would actually sit on the city's skyline as a sculptural object. And the additional height you could get from that didn't necessarily have to contain floors of accommodation, but you could go very high just in order to basically have some kind of advert on the skyline. Not an advert as we understand it nowadays, but to give your building presence on the skyline. There's a great quote from Charles Moore, the great American educator and architect, who's not terribly fashionable at the moment. He's being a great proponent of postmodernism, but he had this fantastic quote about the tall buildings, and he was very kind of opposed to what are called museum slabs, sort of Seagram building style, very kind of rectilinear skyline. He was very opposed to that because he felt that you should be like Superman. When you wanted to bound onto these buildings, you had to think about this fantastic kind of, cityscape you were going to be bounding into. And what was that roof line going to be like? Would you want to sit and dream of those up levels of the building? Would you want to inhabit them? And so he's trying to encourage people to really think about their skyline in that way, which, there are buildings in Glasgow, particularly the Hat Rack, which do that.
Thanks. I'm just reminded there's Ian Simpson, who designed the hotel in Manchester we've been talking about. His fee for the job was the top 2 floors of that tower.
Yes.
And he imported mature olive trees, craned them into a fantastic apartment. Not that I've been in it, but or I know.
That's an interesting point, actually. I, a couple of years ago, wrote a conservation management plan for George Square, which never got published for the council. But as part of that, I had to consider the backdrop of the square. And I was conscious when I was writing that when London was putting together this tall buildings policy, they had one particular policy that tall buildings were not allowed to impinge on the views outside of the Somerset House courtyard. Right. And I was like, well, with George Square, you've got the city building, City College tower sitting there, but actually I really enjoy it because it has that whole village-like skyline. It's very Corbusian, but it is really enjoyable and it makes a statement on the skyline. It's anonymous and it's a real pleasure to look at. And I was trying to contrast that at the time with there was the proposal for the huge car park for the Mechanic Galleries extension. I was trying to warn that on the skyline, which felt like the route along the skyline wasn't going to work as effectively as the College of Building Printing did.
Thanks.
I just wanted one final point is I think that that sort of animated roofscape analogy that you mentioned, which I would just love Glasgow to sort of capitalise on that, and nothing pains you more when you get up to the top and all you can see is air conditioning units on a flat Sarnival roof. And so I think the reason for that is because so many of our buildings that are going up are monofunctional on their floor plate all the way up. So there's no reason to go to the top, and I think that's the problem with a lot of the sort of view platforms, because there's no, whereas recently I was fortunate to get up to the top of the Alison Hutchison building and Leith, down in Leith. It's a huge tower block, and it was incredible to look back to see like Carlton Hill and Arthur Seat, and look back to the city centre from there, I'd never ever had before. And actually, when you look the other way, you look back onto Leith, and the rooftops of Leith were just fantastic. There was like balconies, and people had little gardens there, and these were like pubs on the ground, housing in the middle, roof gardens on the top, and maybe the offices and things, timber gardens around the back. So I think that kind of, that landscape could be created, I think, where there's a sort of richness to the actual building programme, and I don't think it currently, well, it would need to be a sort of complex planning strategy, I think, that would allow that to happen.
Thanks. Chris, yes.
Sorry, I'll just speak really briefly because I think the college building is a great building in the city, and I think that does something on the Skyline, which is really quite interesting. So I think maybe public access might not be possible, but I think your point about making special moments at the top of the building is something that speaks to the wider city. Is quite an interesting thing and something that should be explored.
Thanks, Chris. We've got a question at the back.
What is a tall building?
Yes.
When do we decide a building is tall? The Hat Rack was a tall building at one point. There are plenty of buildings in the city that are 8 stories tall, which are slab blocks, which are horrific and do nothing to the urban environment. There seems to be a lack of quality that we've been discussing here. Is the problem that Glasgow really hasn't been blessed with quality proposals for tall buildings? And one last thing, from tall buildings you get fantastic views, but what is a tall building?
Thank you. Karen, could you start? Jude, would you like to?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with that. I also think that a city can kind of set the bar as well. That you can decide. I mean, my worry a little bit with some of the discussions we've had is sort of there's a general assumption that we'll have them, and because as we know in the global capitalist economy, people sort of purchase land here, there, and everywhere as investments, sit on it until the time is right, and then get as much as they can from land as possible. And to come back to Andy Whiteman, you can actually control these things. And the quote that I like from him, I like all his quotes, is that I got an intellectual crush, is that the law and economy around land has been structured to benefit the haves at the expense of the have-nots. And I think that's what I mean about a city deciding. It's not so much what's tall, it's just what's appropriate and what's for the benefit of the citizens of Glasgow. And I think there are things you can do to manage vacant land, to have a strategic plan for how the city grows and develops. A lot of these are tied up in very complex taxation laws, but they can do it in Norway, they can do it in Germany. I don't see why we couldn't be doing it here. Really, I don't think we have to accept what happens elsewhere as a definition of what's tall, which means very, very tall.
You think, Jude, more of a carrot than a stick to get people?
Yeah, no, I think there can be positive incentives. I'm not necessarily against going up high. If there's an urban, a logical, if it's to capture a wonderful view of the campuses, or if it's to frame or mark an edge of a gateway to something, I'm not anti-high. It's just, I think that the mechanisms as architects, we defend high because that's what the clients are asking us to do. And it's not because it's the right thing to do, necessarily.
Chris?
I think that's great, actually. What's the right thing to do for a site? Is it a tall building? That's really interesting. And I suppose, there is, there are incentivizations that you can do to move people, encourage people to develop in certain areas, which should be explored. There is also an onus on us as architects to, it's also to influence the client in what we think is the right outcome for a particular site. The question, what is tall? Interestingly, I had on my second last slide, what the council said is tall, is I think taller than its neighbour, which is interesting. And maybe, as you say, you can have the front of the client, which is all the buildings of a similar height, all equally bland, in my opinion. that's probably not great. We can do better, so quality is important, absolutely.
Thanks, Chris. Neil, would you like to add anything, particularly around the first question as well, and the...
It's a different one. I'm thinking of, there was a scheme that came to the Urban Design Panel pre-application, so I obviously don't want to name any names because it was contentious with us, but it was in a part of town where the data was old tenements, 4 stories, and it was a site that potentially had a superb view back to the city centre, and the architects had gone for, tried to basically pick up a former tenement footprint on the site, but then take it up to 7 stories compared to the rest of this tenemental quarter, and then treat it as a deck access scheme at the back, and it just did not work at all. And it impinged, even though I don't think they even realised it, on one of the city's key view corridors, and it could have made a fantastic terminus to this view corridor if it actually they'd been bolder and just tried to forget about the whole tenement footprint and just gone for a point tower, and it would have been much more elegant. And it's the same as if you look at Glasgow Harbour, where the Fox master plan for Glasgow Harbour was completely abandoned, and we've ended up with this kind of, sort of bizarre kind of looking skyline that's kind of appearing there, which is totally out of context, because it was suddenly we must go tall on these particular sites. When all that's happened is that has kind of, Glasgow Harbour is going to take so much longer to fill out as a consequence of that. Whereas if they'd stuck to the original master plan, it could have been more or less complete by now, and they could have had a single point tower, which would be much more attractive on the Clyde. But instead, we've got this sort of strange cluster that doesn't really go anywhere.
But as we've said, it's very difficult to marshal.
Yeah.
The question instead.
An observation that I welcome comments on. Some years ago, it turns out it was 2010, I took a photograph from the canal looking towards the university. And there's a most fantastic, you can pass the photograph around, as a panorama stepping up to the university tower, which I'm surprised you haven't made more of, because it's very distinctive from lots of places that you don't expect in the city. And I was up there again today, and they've since built 2 new blocks of flats, kind of big tenement height, just down below the canal, which has obscured that panorama. Now you can go and kind of get a window glimpse of the university tower. So those are not officially tall buildings. They didn't have any neighbours, so you can't use that definition. The university tower view is also getting nibbled away from the south, where they're building very tall, or putting out a big framework for some more student housing along Kelvin, whatever it is, road. So any comments about sort of accidental nibblings of informal views from distance?
In Edinburgh, they have the viewing cones, don't they?
Yes.
So in Edinburgh, it's actually protected views.
Can you pass the mic across?
Right. So yeah, there's these viewing cones. So actually, that's maybe something that the council could think about in Glasgow, that it's actually the distant views that we're looking in from within, looking out, that really should be protected as well. So it's not just tall buildings next to other buildings, it's looking at the city as a whole and making those viewing cones listed elements.
It's very difficult because I was involved in the assessment in Edinburgh because it is such an open, it has such open views. It's very difficult to say when a view stops and when it would not intrude. And you do get these strange popping up views that you hadn't expected until they appeared. I do think that's a feature of Edinburgh which has been very difficult to legislate for.
I agree with Karen. I think the viewcon thing of Edinburgh, at least it makes those involved mindful. And as architect, it's something you can bring to the team and talk through and go and stand there and things. So I think I wish that planning and the teams within authorities had more time, more colleagues, more investment to actually put these things in place, because at the moment I think again it's a challenge of sort of economic cuts and such like that a lot of people are just worked, they just don't have capacity, and And, you know, we end up sitting here talking about things that are problems where actually they could have been prevented. And I think with a bit of investment up front and empowering the teams in the sort of city design and things like to work and work with universities and to develop strategies. And I know there are some plans to do that. I know there are some workshops on the 9th of Nick Walker. There's workshops with university and planners invited and things, and students at the universities in Scotland have an incredible resource to carry out incredible work, analysing science, and that information tends to get sort of put away for the next year, and I think there's a bit more collaboration between our institutions, whether that be sort of local authority and academia and urban design panel. You wonder if it's just a wee bit of planning and and strategy in terms of time and money. It's quite dry, but I think that would breed a wider conversation and a bit of glue, between some of these conversations. Because I think sometimes we feel like there's nowhere really to go to get all the information. You go into a portal somewhere and there's a document under somebody's desk, and it just seems like there's all this incredible wealth of information that isn't being used to its full potential.
Yeah, I hope it's working there. Well, I agree with these two, which is great. I think the view cone thing in Edinburgh is quite interesting because it does make you aware and explore these different views which maybe you don't necessarily think about. So I was up there today as well, as it happens, and you do get a fantastic view from the canal across the city, and not just that one, but there's various others as well which are quite interesting. And I suppose you tend to think of Glasgow looking from the north, but you also get those views looking down across. So yeah, it'd be great to identify these views and make sure that people were aware of them when they were presenting information to the planners.
But would they be low build zones, or would they be careful how you build?
Well, I think it's an awareness of what you're building, isn't it?
Yes.
If it's accidental, oh, oops, I've just blocked that important view of the university.
Yeah.
It's too late. But at least if you've got the view, you can explore. Does this work? Is this a good thing to do in this location? At the minute, I guess that there are those accidents that happen, which the planners, don't necessarily have the resource to do, or those fundamental things in Edinburgh that have been considered because of its World Heritage status.
One of the things I love at the moment, I think the city is a kind of a moment where it does really need to start thinking strategically about this, is because of that kind of sudden, 30% of the tall buildings in the city have disappeared in a relatively short period of time. It has had a real impact on the skyline, and I think actually quite a beneficial way. And one of the ones that I've really noticed, and it's literally just since the spring of this year, is when you walk down through the south side and you cut through Govan Hill and you cut up Cathcart Road into the New Gorbals. There's a moment when you're going over the M74 when you can suddenly, the whole skyline is revealed of Glasgow, and it is really quite a beautiful skyline now. And suddenly the Caledonia Road Church takes its primacy again, because those awful Lauriston tower blocks, the kind of four big black hulking monsters that just kind of sucked in all the light from the sky in Glasgow, have gone. And Greig Thompson's masterpiece is being liberated, and you really notice it now. And so you have to think about the settings of key buildings like that, and how the surrounding buildings can set them off or undermine them, as the case was with those tower blocks.
I got some of the point. I'm sorry, am I speaking okay to this? London asked Richard Rogers to write, I think it was Boris Johnson. I think it's Cities on a Small Planet is the name of the book which Rogers wrote for the City of London. And Edinburgh has appointed, as you probably know, an architectural champion, they did, in the name of Terry Farrell. In your opinion, would Glasgow benefit from that overall views of someone of repute to add some guidance to the City Council and perhaps to the practitioners in the city?
I would say probably not. In my opinion, I actually think the urban design panel is a great forum, and I think it's not necessarily the views of one person, but the views of a collection of people, and you know, it's maybe, dare I say it, not just architects. It's a selection of people that's important to hear their views. So, you know, I know that Edinburgh, I think also had Terry Fowler on stage as a design guru. I'm not quite sure whether that benefited the city or not. My personal view is probably not. So I would say let's involve more people and let's have a bigger discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Chris in the sense that I think a broad church, so not to use a faith-based analogy, but you know, a broad range of people, and again, not just built by professionals. I think so. Harry Burns, the former Chief Medical Officer for Scotland, has highlighted the drastic health inequalities in Scotland and how that's interconnected to place. And you know, we need to not just think about the physicality of our cities and how they grow, but education, health, active travel, ecologies, all of those things. So I remember when I was quite a young architect, I was just newly qualified, a friend of mine, his dad was the chief architect, I think it was in Munich. I remember him talking about they had this big model of the whole city and people would just go in and have workshops and chat. And Glasgow does actually have a model, a physical model, it has a virtual model, and it has two wonderful schools of architecture. It has a strong urban design panel, which a lot of cities don't have. It has a very sort of enthusiastic city design team. You sort of think, well, there's no reason why we couldn't be. We've got the Glasgow Centre for Population Health. We've got, Glasgow Clyde Valley Green Network Partnership. There are all these agencies who do talk to each other a bit, but the thing that's missing there is the sort of civic, sort of community activism. We've got the Community Empowerment Act now, so you feel like everything sort of should be coming together. You just feel like somebody just needs to just map it all out and sit down and work out a plan. And I think that is a project in itself. And I think rather than, your question, I think the answer is it isn't one sort of person that flies in, because that person's not going to sit down in a dark room and work all this out. I think it needs to be a sort of joined up agency, but it needs a working group, I would suggest, but and somebody who's prepared to just sit down and do the hard work of working.
Thanks very much. Do you want to add, Kat?
Well, it's just also, you have to remember that it takes a long time to get buildings built, so somebody couldn't just come in and do a big kind of plan for Glasgow, because that would have moved that moment in time.
Yeah.
Buildings take years and years and years, so I think you do need that diversity, and you do need all those different agencies coming together and then pledging that what they do is for the good of the city. So I think it is that broader group that has to control that. And the key thing is quality. If you build quality, that then enhances the city.
The point was that it was not an architect coming in to take charge and do everything, but in fact to set policies and set in place the all-embracing community aspect that you're talking about.
Sort of almost like a kind of leadership role rather than...
Yeah.
Thanks, sorry.
Okay, sorry.
A question here?
Maybe we could turn the lighthouse into sort of Parliament of urban planning. What my question was, I think the slides that Junta were particularly striking, take that map of Glasgow in 1900. When you think of how the city's population at that time was probably, 1.1 million, yet how compact the city actually was at that point in time. Think about the biggest shock that's hit Glasgow in the last 50 years, 40% of the population being dispersed, and this subsequent expansion of the city actually in its area. So that kind of leads to a real tension between the desire to create an idealised skyline of tall buildings and the fact that the city as we encounter it is actually heavily underutilised. So I think that's the key issue. How do we address that? And I think someone else made the point about, lots of the tall buildings that are built in Glasgow, they aren't residential, they are hotels, they are office buildings, commercial buildings, or educational buildings. So they almost act as poles of gravity that attract people to use the area around them. And maybe if we actually can bolster that through addressing at the ground level, increasing densification of the city's population. Maybe that's a way to actually reinforce the ability to build viable tall schemes in the city centre. So I guess tying all that together is to add to the point that Jim was talking about Andy Whiteman, who's also, I'm also got the fan of his, James agreeing with. But what I was going to say is, how do we actually put a system of governance in place to actually attract and create the impetus to densify the city's use? You know, people have talked about land value taxation. Is there examples, maybe Hong Kong's an illustrative example, or others, where they've actually put in place systems of governance and incentives to drive economic behaviour in that direction? And how do we do that in Glasgow? At the moment we have perverse incentives like derating derelict land, which actually just is creating a perverse incentive for our developers not to use the land. You know, it's just to find out how do you deal with those issues that are root causes of the problem. So.
Yes, a difficult question. Would you like to try?
Okay, well, your problem straight away with Hong Kong is that the problem in Hong Kong is that the government owns all the land in Hong Kong, so the government controls the stream of land that comes onto the market, so that what you get is, particularly in the centre of the city, that sites are so rare that they go for a phenomenal amount of money, so you end up building tall because you have to extract the maximum value from that site. How you would apply that in Scotland, I have no idea.
But can you see this is the way to achieving this? Experience that now.
Land value tax, maybe. I don't know enough.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know enough.
Chris, would you like to comment?
I don't really have a lot to say, to be honest. I think it's a very complex question, and it's how do you incentivize? I think the premise of the question is good, and I think that's right. I think there's lots of gap sites and opportunities to develop the city in those areas that we want to address. The issue is the commercial reality, and how do you control that, which is something that I don't really know how you'd address that. Maybe the others would.
Does Andy Whiteman say?
Yeah, I've got two things. Andy Whiteman says, right?
I thought he was absent.
What does that say? Well, he offers three kind of. So there's another one I was thinking about. One is the equalise maps and refurb and rebuild. So you incentivize using what you've got.
Yes.
And as you mentioned, it's all those underused offices in Glasgow City Centre. There's no incentive for people that own them to do development, sell them or anything like that. They're just sitting on them. You introduce a land value tax to prevent land banking, so people don't wait till the economy's right. You're de-incentivising just sitting on it. And another point that Andy makes is a lot of people that own land don't live in Britain, and they're not paying a tax here. Now, if that land goes on fire or something vandalises it, who turns up? The police. Fire brigade, we pay for that, we do, taxpayers. So you introduce a land value tax to prevent land banking, and you prevent non-domiciles purchasing land when land is up for sale, and it's locally first.
Yeah.
So it's a local incentive, the local developers, local owners, local housing associations, things, have first dibs at the site. And I think that sort of political, I think Andy when he made these statements, he was being sort of very political in his book. I think also what incentives for multi-use. There's obviously involving local communities and understanding their needs as well through sort of planning process. I think there could be. I don't think there's one simple answer. It's sort of complex, too complex for this, but I don't think it's impossible. And I think there is all this research and Rob from being in universities about research from all the things that are happening around the world. And say, well, could we not just
there are very often, thank you very much, Andrew, but there are very often unintended consequences of legislation that is supposed to promote conservation and reuse. To give an example, empty listed buildings are zero rated, which is good in one way and bad in so many others. So that's a thing that's being reviewed at the moment. Who would you give the power to take away the zero rating? There are a whole lot of issues, and very often, like VAT on alterations to buildings, there are unintended consequences. It's very difficult to wrap all these things up into a good package of measures. But we shouldn't stop trying to do that, of course.
Carol.
Follow Andy.
Okay.
Do you have to be careful with attending concerts. You just have to look at the People's Budget in 1909, 1910. Happened
Yes.
on the back of that.
Yes.
So, kill the construction industry and Glasgow probably got wood. So, you don't want to do that.
I'll take this. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I grew up in Southland, and as a teenager when I looked across the river, I saw Glasgow University, and the Skyline had been destroyed by the University Library building. Do you think in the future that if they redevelop that area and replace, I hope one day, the university building, do you think that they should be constrained to allow the original shape of the university building to be predominant on the skyline?
I'll maybe answer that. We've been working with Glasgow University for a number of years, and they do have a new campus strategy plan now. It's obviously Western Ferry side is going to be a Rhine University. So there will be reconfiguring there, and there's been a lot of work done for scale for the list of buildings that are embedded in that Western Ferry site to be retained. So I don't think we'll be getting anything quite like the University Library, but I think there are taller buildings planned, but they are within the kind of in keeping with the scale of the buildings surrounding them, and also respecting the tower. But I don't think we can demolish the Boyd Door building or the land, because they're there now, and they are part of the landscape of the West End. So I don't think quite, maybe if I had that planning condition, you go down Andy Road and you stop the traffic lights, you just see this huge edifice. But we're kind of used to it now, aren't we? That's the university.
I'm not. And I grew up with them.
Refurbishing to make it look more beautiful, but I don't think they'll be building things quite like that. They are more conscious of their impact on the city now than they were at that time.
But I think that, if you don't mind, Judith made a point earlier about these tall buildings, council blocks that were put up. These were a celebration of architecture and of life. These were the best that you could get. And it's true also of the Gilmore Hill campus. This was designed, they said, shall we get Le Corbusier to design this, the library, or maybe Alvarado, but in the end it was Sir William Whitfield. So it was a prestigious job, and everything was broad. Education was everything. We were broadcasting the power of education. I don't think, whatever you think of that building, we shouldn't forget that. Or, the other clustered citadel, as we put it, at Garnet Hill, the Newbury Town, or the one at Jordan Hill, in fact, that's what people would do, celebrating this fantastic democratization and expansion of education, which was a good thing, if you like that.
One of the slides that I put there, I think if the building was to be replaced, yes, you would review it on those terms. I agree with Donald too. It was a very important time in our history, and I just wish that we could dream again about the challenges that we face in our current times, about environment and obviously health in a similarly positive way.
Chris,
I shall pass it over.
I suppose that winding the clock back to sort of Victorian times and the City Improvement Trust and what John Carrick did with the City Improvement Trust, and how very much Glasgow's formed thereafter as a Victorian city is so indebted to that, and the datums that he set, the 4-story datums for the tenements, and how, when you look down Sutton Hall Street, you get this kind of very clean, linear sweep, which is really what I think of when I think of Glasgow. That if you could look again at how you do that, and I'm particularly interested in the German system of how, is it the Baustellen system, about how they do that and how they put infrastructure in the first place to kind of develop sites, but then they dictate quite clearly what gets built in them, the datums that get built in them, and it makes things much more predictable for everybody, developers and the community as well, that perhaps as a reforming system might be something to have a look at.
Thanks very much. I've got time for one more question. Are you still?
Yeah.
Yes.
Just to bring it back to the idea of the skyline of the city, and I think it's worth remembering that the city is actually a lot shorter. Hello? Sorry about this. I think it's worth remembering the city's a lot shorter than it used to be in the... Sorry, I'll just shout. The city's a lot shorter than it used to be towards the end of the 19th century. I think it's worth remembering that if you were to stand in the middle of the city centre and to look north towards Royston or to the southeast towards Dalmarnock, we would be ringed by some of the biggest chimneys which in Europe. One of my favourite images is from a plate of illustrations from the Chicago World Encyclopedia, which is Notable Buildings of the World in 1884, which shows the Statue of Liberty, the Washington Monument, the Eiffel Tower, obviously the tallest building at the time. But at number 7, we have the Tenant Stock in Royston, astonishing 450 feet high. So it's a call to be bold.
Yeah, no, thanks very much for that. It just reminds me of the Barcelona problem, which is, where they had these wonderful skinny chimneys that Gaudi is supposed to have referenced in his cathedral, but they're no longer in use, and therefore, what do you do? Will they all be demolished? Will we take away from the character and the narrative, the story of the city? But anyway, that's a bit of a side issue. I think that's a great point. Any comments that you'd like to make on that last one? No, I think that...
That's a lovely point, yeah.
Yeah, sorry?
Just that's a lovely point.
That's a good point, very well made. It's a great one, an exclamation mark. So it just leaves me to thank so much our presenters tonight, Karen Pickering, Jude Barber, Chris Colton-Smith and Neil Murphy, who've done a fantastic job of explaining and unravelling all the mysteries of tall buildings. Thank you very much.